You're listening to Always Player One, a solo board gaming podcast.
Hello and welcome to Always Player One. I'm Scruffy.
And I'm Norm, and today we're going to be talking about the Coin Tribes Revolt, Boudica's rebellion against Rome.
He's back! So for all of our listeners who aren't on Patreon and haven't heard the planning phase, Norm is back. It's back to business as usual, and we'll be talking about, like Norm says, Coin Tribes Revolt today, a wonderful little print and play game that we've been enjoying the past couple of weeks. This was meant to be episode 20. As any devotees will know, we usually do a print and play every 5 episodes, but we missed the last one, so we're making up for it now on episode 21.
Yeah, and very quick note, thanks for everyone who was just really supportive and sent nice messages whilst I was away and suffering a little bit with my health, but I'm really, really glad to be back. And I kind of had this conversation a little bit on the planning phase, so I don't want to rehash old grounds. And if you haven't heard it, well, then why aren't you on the Patreon? But yeah, I'm very, very grateful to be back. I'm very grateful that we have lovely listeners who are super supportive.
Speaking of the Patreon, we have had, I think pretty much everyone's on there now, right? We've had a real surge of people coming in and signing up for our Patreon. So welcome everyone and thank you for signing up. If you haven't already, the main pull to sign up is, like we've just alluded to there, our little mini-series, the behind-the-scenes look at how we decide what games we're going to cover. It's called the planning phase. It's really finding its feet at the moment, I think. And yeah, besides episode 8, which was the one where I was going solo, it's all quite nice and chill. We have a lovely chat. That one got a bit weird.
And the links to our Patreon are in the description, but it's patreon.com/alwaysplayer1podcast. Let's get on with the main topic, shall we? So today, obviously, like I said, we're talking about the Coin Tribes Revolt. We're going to be looking to unpack our thoughts on the game in general. We're also going to be looking at the best way to play solo, because the game has 2 versions. It can be played with bots or without bots. So we're going to be talking about what we preferred, and we're also going to be looking at, is this a good entry point to the coin family of games? Because this is kind of a micro coin game. Not really a coin game, but a micro version of a coin game. So is it a good entry point from our perspective? What do we think? That's what we're looking to unpack today. I'm excited to get started. Before we go any further, though, Scruffy, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about the Coin Tribes Revolt?
So, Coin Tribes Revolt is a 1-to-4-player print-and-play game inspired by the Coin series of games. Coin games offer asymmetric factions and focus on major historical conflicts, with Coin Tribes Revolt being set during the early Roman occupation of Britain. In this game, 4 factions compete to achieve their individual objectives, vying for territory, popular support, and units on a map of southeast England. They each have a unique win condition, which, if achieved during one of the 4 reckoning phases of the game, will result in their victory. The reckoning phases are variable in when they happen, but they will always occur spaced out within certain predetermined sections of the game, getting more and more likely to trigger as the turns go on within those sections. After the 4th reckoning phase, the game ends even if no one has achieved their objective. The 4 factions are allied in pairs, with the Romans being in league with the Catalani, the non-rebels, and the rebels being the Iceni and the Trinovantes. The objectives for the allied factions often sort of align, but each has their own agenda ultimately, so working together is likely, but not always the focus. In Coin Tribes Revolt, a turn consists of 2 factions acting or passing, and then a cleanup phase. The choice for action happens in initiative order, with all factions having a random initiative determined at the start of the game, a d6 dice being used to show this. The choice for the first act will always be between taking an action in 2 regions, an action in 2 regions with a bonus, or taking the event card for that turn. Once chosen, the next faction in initiative order will be forced to pick a certain action based on what was previously picked. Alternatively, factions can pass, ensuring they are more likely to act first in the next turn. During the cleanup phase, any factions which have acted become inactive for the next round, and their initiative is re-rolled. Those who pass have their initiative dice increased by 2 and are then ordered on the active side of the board, ready for next turn. The main reason for passing is often the event cards, which are very powerful effects and can be very situational. Only one event card can be taken per turn, and the upcoming card for the next turn is always face up. Even if a card is not selected, the face up card will be available next turn. The available actions are always rally, move, or battle, and each faction does these things slightly differently, but in essence they boil down to manipulating the troops on the board, represented by coloured d6 dice. So, for example, if the Romans attack the Iceni, then the blue dice in that region will be decreased relative to the value of the red dice in the same area. Areas are considered controlled by the faction with the highest value on the dice in the region. Bonus actions are a little bit more varied, with each faction being able to affect the game in different ways. For example, the Iceni being the only faction able to destroy the 3 cities on the map, essential for their objective. Although there is some overlap. For example, most are able to occupy the forts as bonus actions, defensive spaces which help prevent losses in battle and add +2 to the control of the region for any faction in one. These bonus actions are extremely important then in achieving victory for the factions. The final thing to mention is that each region has a population number and an attitude towards the non-rebel factions, ranging from strong sympathy to strong defiance. This is manipulated through the bonus actions and through some events, and is also very important in the ultimate objective for some of the factions. As a solo player, you can choose to play all 4 factions or use the AI bots for as many factions as you like. Bit of a long one, but it's a very nuanced game, so hopefully that gives you some idea of what we're looking at when we played Coin Tribes Revolt for anyone who hasn't played it before.
What are you talking about, Scruffy? This is a micro game, right?
Micro game. I tell you what, learning the rules for this, it did feel like learning, a fairly mid-weight game. Did you find that?
Well, I started with version 1, and as I mentioned in the intro, there are a couple of versions to the game. There's version 1 and version 2. Version 1 started life as a 9-card game, 9-card micro game, and I think it was in that format for a design contest on Board Game Geek. So it had to be in that format in order to be entered, whereas version 2 isn't. And you can tell the difference because version 2 rulebook is about 20 pages, very small pages, I will say, and mostly bullet pointed, so still fairly simple to learn. But version 1 is like a double-sided A4 piece of paper, maybe 2 double-sided A4 pieces of paper from memory, but it's very, very straightforward. But we can get into what's better, version 1 or version 2, but version 1 was less rules overhead, but not by a long way, just the rulebook was a little bit more digestible, I'm going to say.
Yeah, full disclosure right up front, I have only played version 2 because I really liked it, and when I was learning the rules for version 1, I noticed some very, very janky design choices that I realized would have stopped me having fun with the game. So, for example, there's a choice there where you can basically eliminate the Romans from being able to achieve their goal if you destroy a city. And one faction is able to destroy a city on turn 1 with one of their actions. So if the dice are rolled and that faction is highest in initiative order at the start of the game, they can just eliminate a player. And so for me, that kind of tainted it a bit, and I intended to go back and give it a go, but I got so wrapped up in playing version 2 that I just was like, well, why not just play this again?
Yeah, well, you do you, Scruffy. I started with version 1 and moved on to version 2, but I certainly feel that version 2 is just a little bit more accomplished and a little bit more polished, so to speak. Doesn't suffer from those kind of glaring design oversights like the Romans being able to be taken out of the game turn 1, or I'll be honest, I played 4 games of version 1, and in the last 2 games that I played, the Trinovantes won on the first reckoning.
Wow.
And oftentimes, some factions weren't even able to take a turn because the pass mechanic works slightly differently with version 1 as well. And
Uh-huh.
I'll get onto the nuances in a moment, but I think what I want to do first is kind of unpack what we think about the game. So, what are your thoughts going in? You mentioned in the intro that you've been having fun with it. So, I'm assuming you feel relatively positive about Coin Tribes?
Yeah, it was great. It was a really, really fun print and play. I'm glad I stuck with it and went through learning the rules. And the first game you play, because I played it with all sorts of different ways. I played it with controlling all factions myself, controlling one faction and the rest being done by the bots, controlling two factions and the sort of opposing factions being the bots. That was quite a nice sort of middle ground there. I enjoyed that. And so, but the bots do take a bit of getting your head around, especially as you're learning the game. But I think it's also very helpful in teaching you the game and teaching the sort of moves you want to be striving for. If you see what they're doing and think about, oh, okay, so that's probably why that's designed to make them a competent opponent. It makes you almost better able to learn the game and pick it up and plan your turns, and then also spot those moments where you go, oh, actually, instead of doing the almost set move for what's good for the Romans right now, I can see another little thing I could do here that would be even better or is more important because of the game state. And it makes you feel like a clever clogs, which is quite nice. Did
Nice.
you have a similar experience going in? I mean, you say you came from one, didn't you? So how was one to try and learn?
One was fairly straightforward, but version 1 doesn't have any bots at all. So,
Oh, really?
yeah, so I only played as all four factions. And
Hmm.
one thing I will say about playing as all four factions is the top action got used a lot more in order to restrict what the next faction was able to do.
Hmm.
Whereas, obviously, playing as the bots, they want to do as much as they can all the time,
Yeah.
which leads to less restrictions. So I think the first thing I wanted to sort of unpack is how the turn order works and where the kind of forcing lines are in this game, because it's very interesting that when the turn order is, I think, one of the most exciting things about the game. I don't know about you, Scruffy, but I love how it works.
Yeah, yeah. I spent a long time on it in the description there because it's quite a big deal. Like, who gets to go first makes a massive difference because when you go first, you get basically free reign. You get a choice between two two actions and a bonus, which often that bonus is just what you're playing for, or the event card, which is also something that sometimes you're just playing for. And then everything on the next side is a bit weaker, unless you take the event card. Then you're allowing the next faction to get the two actions and a bonus. So you're kind of in charge of what they get to do. Whereas, but the other spaces they get to choose from are, one of them is one action, just one action, which always feels horrible if you're left forced to do that, or one action or the event card. And that's, I mean, if you want the event card, it's good. But both of those, if they're just the one action, it makes you kind of really tempted to pass. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've done a brilliant job of explaining how that works. Essentially, it's two rows with three spaces on them, right?
Yeah, so essentially what you do is when you're the first to act, you can choose between doing two actions and a bonus, or taking the event card, or passing. But passing when you're the first player is pretty useless. It's pretty weak. In fact, I don't think you'd ever do it.
You might
Um,
if you want the next event card that's coming up.
or you potentially if you want the next event card. Yeah, actually, that's a really good shout, Scruffy. Yeah. But what you choose, then you have all those lovely decisions. Which one of those boxes do you want to go down? And that seems very simple, but actually, there's a lot of decisions to make there, and I'll get to that in a second. But whatever you pick, the next player then has a choice of two things: do the action adjacent to the one you just picked, or pass. Nothing else. And that kind of ability to limit the next player or the next bot like that is really fun, because you have to factor it into your decision making. And this is what I was saying, where actually, you think you're choosing just between three things. Do I want to go? Do I want to place my dice here, here, or here? But each time you're thinking, okay, well, I can only, if I, whichever one I choose, I can only do one action, but in two regions. So you have to think which action will be best for me to do in multiple regions.
Hmm.
Okay, maybe this one. Okay, well, which regions do I want to do it in? And then finally, do I want a bonus or do I want the event? Would that be better? And just when you think, okay, I've done it, you then have to consider, what does that leave my opponent? Because
Yes.
they are going to take whatever's next. And that's really interesting. Obviously, the bots act in a much more predictable way. But when I was playing all 4 factions, I was thinking to myself, I know what they're going to do next, because I'm going to be the Romans next turn, and the Romans they're going to want to do this. So if I go here, they're going to do this. But if I go here, they'll pass. Oh, but I don't want to pass, because that means that the other rebel, which is aligned with me at the moment, the me that I'm taking a turn for at the moment, will be bottom of the pile. And so I really kind of want to leave them something good, so they actually go and do something useful on their turn, so that they don't pass and screw over the other faction. So it's like layers upon layers upon layers of decision making, and is what is essentially, do you want to put your dice on this space, or this space? And that was, I think Kendall said when he designed Rollway Station, he wanted the elegance to come from the restricted components, and that is a really great example of elegance coming out of the restricted components. Amazing.
Yeah, I got very similar vibes to Railway Station. I remember when I was playing it. I mean, I see Railway Station as kind of gold standard for print and play, so this is a big compliment for Coin Tribes. But I was feeling that restrictiveness, and that you only get to do one choice in 2 places and a bonus at most, and that's not a huge impact. Some of the event cards are pretty swingy, but they're kind of difficult to acquire as well. And then that is instead of doing an action. But yeah, so the restrictiveness is amazing. The joyous thing as well is that there's a massive difference between, because it's two factions get to act out of the 4. So there's a massive difference between whether you've got your allied action following you or your opposing faction following you. So if you're a Roman and you've got a rebel coming up next, you want to limit what they can do with your choice of action. But if you're the Roman and you've got the Catavolani coming up next, then you're going to want to give them their best choice next, because you're kind of in it together. To an extent.
Yeah.
Because essentially you still want to win, but they have very similar interests. So them being powerful is very good, because it means that they're going to be beating up the rebels. They can't beat up your units. I actually came to the end of a game where I was playing all 4 factions, and I did learn I am horrible to play against, for sure. I felt very sorry for you guys who have to play against me, because it was a brutal and a cutthroat game compared to the easy streak that was the bots, just everyone doing their thing, having fun. It was just go away. In the end, everyone except one faction just ended on basically 0 points. It was amazing. I don't quite know how it happened. Anyway, the thing is with that right at the end of the game, when I was kind of the Romans on the last turn of the game, and I was like, oh no, the Catavolani are going to win. Can I attack them? I had to look it up in the rulebook to see if you're allowed to attack your ally and betray them at the last minute, but apparently that's not allowed. So that would have been nice.
It's interesting because, like you said, you do want them to do well, but you also don't want them to win, because at the end of the day, you are on your own. But you want them to do well because, as Scruffy mentioned, that controlling a region is very important. But if you can't control a region, something else that is kind of equally important is whether it is controlled by a loyalist faction or whether it is controlled by a rebel faction. If it's controlled by a rebel faction, that means the Iceni can destroy the city, which is very good for them and their winning condition, and pretty devastating for the Catavillanis and the Romans. So, yeah, if you're not doing well in a region, you kind of want your allied faction to be doing well, even though you don't want them to win, because that still benefits you if it can swing it into your faction's favor. If you are a rebel faction and the Trinovantes have control, and with your little 1 unit in there, that swings it into rebel control, that means that it is open in the future to get destroyed, which is great. That helps you win. So yeah, it's very clever the way it incentivizes you to have these mixed feelings about these 4 individual factions that feel kind of aligned but kind of not. in a really nice way, because I hate when people say to me, "Oh, this game is like semi-cooperative." I
Ugh.
always think, "Ah, kill me, I don't want to play." But this game, it manages that sort of mixed emotion, I think, really, really well. And I think from doing some research following that, it seems as though that is something woven into all coin games.
Hmm.
So something borrowed from there. So it's an interesting piece of tension borrowed from those larger games. But I think it translates really well into this micro game. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I've been playing in my mind with the idea because I think it would be really quite fun to play it 4-player for that sort of tension there, that sort of allies and betrayal, that lovely thing of if you're the Romans, do you just move out of that place where there's rebel forces to let them burn down that city? Because you don't really mind if they burn down the city, so long as there's sympathy for you as the Romans. You don't care about the city surviving, and it would upset your ally, but you don't really want your ally to win. And so there's those kind of objectives that you don't care about, but then the sort of overall you do care about, like you just said. And I don't know where I sit on it because the actual amount of downtime I can imagine in a 4-player game would be quite brutal. I don't know how it would feel in a big coin game. I was looking at the One Stop Co-op Shop's playthrough of Cuba Libre, which is apparently the next step into if you want to dive further into coin games. So I can quite see that multiplayer, that sort of tension would be really fun. But even just playing solo, I found it really fun. Especially my favorite way to play was, like I said, with 2 bots as one as the allied factions, and then me with myself allied, and trying to sort of work with and against myself there was really, really fun. Or even, I have to say, just playing with one and having all the others as bots and trying to play off and use and exploit my bot buddy. It was a lot of fun. It was, yeah, that sort of semi-alliedness, the sort of friends when it suits you thing. I think games that can find that are a special sort of fun for me. I really, really enjoyed that too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And one thing that playing with all the bots and with me as one faction, it kind of reminded me of playing against the Wakan in PAX Premier.
Because they cheat.
Because because they cheat, but B, because they all feel like they're doing a lot on their turns, and then it gets to your turn, and you think, how am I gonna act? On my last game, I played as the Iceni and with 3 bots, and on the first turn, I moved and I burnt down the biggest city, and I felt pretty good about that. But that left me with only 2 units. And then just through opportunity, I was able to get the right events at the right time. I never rallied ever again during the game. I just had 2 units, and I managed to win. And when I pulled off the win like that, just through really opportunistic play, it reminded me of what Steve, who was our guest on the PAX Premier episode, said about the Khan, where you are in that case, this like smaller faction, like everybody else is doing these big turns, and you're just kind of going, okay, well, I'm going to exploit the areas that they're not paying attention to. And through that opportunistic play, I'm going to come out on top. And it made me feel really smart. And the game only played for about 20 minutes, but I finished that and I was like, look at me. I've got such a big brain.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to say the way the bots cheat is that it does strip a bit of the fun out of the choices for the turns, because they will always take one action in 2 regions, at least. They'll also take a bonus if that space is available and if it's possible. Otherwise, they'll try and restrict you by taking just the 2 actions of a choice. And they will prioritize above all that, taking the event card if it meets certain conditions on their little flowcharts, right? So, for example, the Iceni bot will always take an event card if it destroys a city or deals 2 or more hits to Romans who don't like Romans.
What have they ever done for us?
I know, right? Except the aqueduct.
Well,
and the robes. That goes without saying. Anyway, yeah, so yeah, they cheat in that way, in that they always take 2 actions, and it kind of loses a bit of the intrigue of the game in that sense. But you're right, it kind of does the same sort of thing to PAX Premier in that it makes you play the game in a different way. And I like that it's so variable for, what is just such a small game. It took so little to print out, and what is such a short game. Like, It doesn't take any time to print out or set up. It's like one page and a page of cards, and then you can print out the bots and the player aids. Like I find them really helpful to have. But other than that, it's really low maintenance, low space, and I was playing it just like on my lap, and yeah, it's very, very quick. And after every game, you sit there and you have this lovely little thought of, okay, so I just played as the Iceni and I lost. I'm going to do that again because I want to win. Or I'll tell you what, this time I'll take the Iceni and the Trinovantes and we'll do it together and face these horrible bots. Or whatever, or you can take over all factions. The amount of choice for how you play the game is really exciting and makes you want to do it again. And because it's so quick, you can.
Yeah, and more importantly, it's very easy to set up again.
Yeah.
The components are minimal. When you add a new unit to the board, you just turn over a die. So there are four dice for each faction. So all you have to do is take off the excess dice that you've been placed on during gameplay, move the dice around, and you're ready to go again.
Yeah, set the little tokens to show the sympathy for the regions. And I remember the setup; like it's so simple. There are 4 regions. Part of the joyous restrictiveness that you were saying earlier of the game is that there are only 4 regions, and that you can only have 6 troops in each region at most. It allows for a really tight, condensed, focused game that is really easy just to slide. I was, instead of using the printed tokens for the sympathy and dissent, I was using coloured tokens that I put next to the 1 or 2s on the board and just flip them over. Next token, little Othello token or something. Perfect.
Yeah, I used I didn't print off the tokens either. I just used pandemic cubes.
Yeah.
I used red for sympathy, blue for defiance, and if it was neutral, I just took them off.
Yeah,
that was it.
Brilliant.
So that means that you mentioned it was very easy to print. Just if you download the files for version 2, which I think everyone, if you haven't already guessed, this is our preferred way to play the game.
Yeah, I thought that would be a bit more of a discussion, but I mean, I didn't even play the first, so I thought you might have come in being like, no, you should try number 1. But if it's no good,
no. I can talk about why. I'll talk about why in a second. When I finish this point, I'll tell you why version 2 is superior, and we'll go from there. But
officially
superior. Always player 1 stamp of approval, which doesn't exist. Yeah, if you download the files, you can see that the map is on there. There's like 3 different pages for the map, and you think, oh, what do I need to print all of this? What's this for? They've just gone to the effort of making the map different sizes depending on how big your dice are for the game, which is quite cool. So all you need to do is print 1 page for the map, print 1 double-sided page for the event cards, and then if you want to, print off the player aid and the bots, which are on another 1 piece of paper. So that's 3 pieces of paper, and you've got everything you need to play the game, except for the physical components like the dice and the tokens for the defiance and sympathy. But 3 pieces of paper is nothing for such a not involved game, but for such a thinky and kind of well thought out and addictive game, I will say.
Yeah, and I did low production quality. I did 4 sheets. I printed the event backs and the front separately, and I glued them together because I'm not as advanced with computers to print it double-sided or smart enough to anticipate that. But yeah, other than that, I did the same with the bots. I just glued them together. I've got a laminator in the post, which I'm intending to laminate the main board with. But other than that, I've been playing it just on paper, and it hasn't felt like, sometimes when you do a print and play game and you don't do the cards properly or whatever, it can feel a bit not quite right, not as tactile or fun. Because I was able to play with my favorite dice for this, it felt so tactile, and there is enough dice rolling as well to make it fun.
I'm so glad you said that.
You don't roll the dice for the troops, but you do roll the dice for your initiative, and you roll the dice for the reckoning phase. Shall I unpack that now, or did you want to dive in there?
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So the way the reckoning phase works is that 4 different sections in the game, the round tracker, which goes to 24 turns in total, 4 different sections, there's kind of red sections. And when you hit those, you move the dice that you're using to track the rounds. Every turn, you move it down a pip, so it starts at 6 and drops down. And then you roll, so at the end of the turn, this is during cleanup, you roll you have a spare dice, which is also used for the bots as well. So if you're playing with the bots, you get to roll that even more. And just love that I'm being all like, oh, you get to roll the dice, but it's important, right?
Yeah.
And so you roll that to see if it beats the number on the reckoning track, and then once that gets to the end of the red section, it automatically happens without you rolling. So it can you don't know if you roll a 6 straight away, it's going to happen immediately. And the amount of times I've had that happen, a surprise early reckoning and a surprise win, because that's when you check for the win conditions, and that's really exciting and tense and fun.
Yeah, I don't want to keep comparing to Pax Premier, but it reminded me of the dominance checks in that game. And
But I preferred it because it's so visually fun and visually interesting. I saw that in the Cuba Libre thing I was looking at, you have certain cards shuffled into quarters of the deck that will come up at certain times. And I always find that, same in Pandemic, I always find that a little bit underwhelming. And I think it's because it's so unpredictable and out there. It's so it feels more random to me, even though it's probably statistically not. There's something about it's hidden in the deck, so it doesn't exist. That object permanence, maybe, that makes me disinterested. Whereas because I can see the dice tick down every round, and I can see the big red section on the turn tracker when we're going to have to start thinking about the reckoning can happen now. It can happen at any point now. I don't know. I find that way more exciting.
That's interesting. I haven't played. Neither of us have played Cuba Libre, so I can't say how it makes me feel. But I wouldn't imagine it makes me feel any different. But I thought that the way you roll the dice to determine if you were going to have a reckoning or not, and the way it kind of, in a very predictable manner, becomes more likely every round. I thought that was such an elegant way to give you pretty much the same feeling, because in Cuba Libre, for example, you do the, like you said, Scruffy, the Pandemic thing. You separate out the deck and you shuffle in one propaganda card, which is like the reckoning phase in the Coin Tribes, and that means that it's going to happen in this portion of the game, but you don't know when. That's exactly how it works with this dice, but again, it's much more elegant because there is no huge stack of cards. There is no big.
It doesn't get lost. It's there. You can see it. You can see there's two. There's number 4 left on the reckoning die. It's going to tick down to 3 next turn, and we're going to roll for it. It's going to be a reckoning, right? Bound to be. But it might not,
Yeah.
But it makes you hustle. And whereas in a big deck, in like Pandemic or something, there's a Pandemic card coming sooner or later. And, I can see that for a lot of people, that's quite fun, exciting. For me, I kind of lose interest because I can't. I'm looking at the back of a deck at the end of the day. I think it is just something about that visual cues, the visual feedback, and my monkey brain.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up about how much you get to roll the dice, because I was worried if a game has a lot of dice, I want to roll them.
Of course,
right? I want to roll them, and when I read that the dice are units and they used to count units, I was like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing. They're saving space. That's clever. But I want to roll them.
Yeah.
I was the same in Orchard. If you look at Orchard, a finished game of Orchard, and you see all those dice, you think, oh, that looks like a fun game. And then you read the rules and realize that, oh, they're just to track the fruit. I still like Orchard. I think it's a fine game, but I want to roll dice. If I have dice, I want to roll them. And so the fact that, yes, you don't roll them on the board, but you do roll every round for the reckoning. Well, not every round, but you do roll most rounds for the reckoning. You do roll every round for initiative. You do roll for the bots. You do roll for tiebreakers as well.
Yeah.
I like that. I thought, yes, good. I'm glad I get to roll the dice. I want to. If I have all these dice, I want to roll them. And it was just, I know, it was a design choice that I thought not only was very clever and elegant, as I've already mentioned, but also just tactile and fun.
I totally agree. And it goes one step further as well, because not only is there a lot of dice rolling, there's also not too much dice rolling. There's elegance in the dice rolling. And that is especially noticeable with the bots. So the way they work is you, on their turn, and we've talked about this in our AI episode when we talked about Pax Premier and all the other times we've brought it up since then. But elegance and not spending spending as little time on the AI turn as possible is super important. And the way it handles this is you just roll that dice once, and it tells you immediately. And this is, I should say, after looking to see if they'll take the event card. Sometimes you don't have to roll it for them, but that will then tell you immediately whether they're going to do an action and where they're going to do an action. So, for example, you'll look down the list and say, okay, in this order, are they going to rally? Yes or no? Are they going to march? Yes or no? And then if not, they'll battle. And the number on the dice determines whether they will, based on the game state. But then after that, each one has two choices. And so whether you rolled an odd number or an even number on the dice, that's the priority, which one you prioritize over the other for those two sort of choices for where they do something. So I'll give you an example. The Romans will rally. So when you roll the dice, the Romans will rally, and you look at the dice, they'll rally if they have less troops on the board than 3 plus that number you rolled. So flat number, let's say you rolled a 2. If they have less than 5 units on the board, they'll rally. Brilliant. Now, whatever you rolled, you'll then look and see if it's odd or even. If it's odd, they'll rally in the locations where they have the most units already. And if it's even, they'll rally where there are the most Icindi units. It's that simple. And then if there are any further ties, if there are 2 equally viable regions out of that, you just roll the dice one more time.
Yeah. So one roll of the dice can tell you 2 different things. What action they're going to take, and 2, which variation on that action they're going to take, how they're going to execute it. And that means that the bots are easy to manage, but also variable and interesting, which is extremely clever for. I mean, I wish you guys could see these bots, and if you can't, jump on the Geek, look at the file, because they are a piece of card. They're not like, if you look at the bots for a big coin game, they're a full-on flow chart.
Yeah.
This is just a card. It's very smart.
Yeah, like about the size of a Magic the Gathering card, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, you're probably spot on with that, Scruffy, and that's really for the variation you get, for the simplicity, for the challenge as well, because they're not easy to beat.
No.
Very, very interesting.
No, I mean, we've both played quite a few games now, and I think maybe over time you get to a point where you can really play the bots and it just becomes a bit trivial. But I think in those cases, there's a variation I haven't even tried yet, where you could play one of the loyalist factions, one of the non-rebels, and one of the rebel factions, and then have the other 2 as bots. That'd be a fun game. Yeah. Or you can try the variation where you play all of them and just take the bots out of it.
And that is fun. That is fun. So one thing I wanted to say is I'm not the type of person who generally enjoys playing both sides or all sides of the table.
Yes.
But I did in this game.
Mm.
And I would imagine it is because there's no hidden information, so that makes it quite easy. 2 is the forcing line on the on how you choose what action you're going to take. You have direct influence, so you have to think, what do I want? What would I want to do in my next turn? Okay, that's interesting. Well, now I know that as this player, I'm going to try and stop that from happening right now. That adds an even deeper layer, which I've really enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, and you're talking about planning there. You never really plan more than one turn in advance, or at least I didn't when I was playing this game. And I think that's the right approach to take. Because I think if you tried to come up with a grand strategy, that would be a bit frustrating, and you'd be able to foil your own strategy because you know what it is. But I don't think that's the way this game is intended. And because it's such a quick game, and that makes me worry about trying this out as a bigger game where you get a lot more in depth and stuff. But because this is such a quick, short, sharp game that can be over by turn, 4 theoretically, or something like that, then you're able to really relax and just play a lot more impulsively and opportunistically, and just look at yourself and the next person in the initiative order, and then don't worry about what's going to happen after that. Maybe you can look to the next round, the next turn. Okay, next turn, this event's coming up, and I really don't want the Iceni to get that because it will mean they win, so I'll pass. But that's about as far as the planning goes. You certainly don't think about your turn. I'm going to do this turn so that next turn I can. Really, you don't plan that far in advance, or at least I didn't. And it meant that I was able to play all 4 factions and not feel analysis paralysis, not feel brain burny, and not feel like I was frustrated at not at thwarting myself all the time because it happened reactionarily rather than preemptively.
Yeah, it's a very tactical game, isn't it? And I think that's a feature with a lot of war games in general, not just coin games, but a lot of war games in general, as they are tactical. It's about reacting because the opponent, unlike in Euro game, for example, your opponents can mess up your plans. In fact, they're incentivized to do so.
Yeah.
And I really like how this game framed the experience around battling. Like, it's very easy to battle, to understand how to battle, and battling is a very good way at gaining control and fulfilling your objectives. So, unlike, let's compare it to Twilight Imperium for a very quick second. Obviously, games at the entire other ends of the spectrum. But I play games of Twilight Imperium where a battle happens and there's real bad feelings about it. There's real, oh, you attacked me. What did you attack me for? Oh, I thought we had an alliance. And that's because the game doesn't frame battling as like a way of fulfilling your objectives. It's kind of a last minute, last ditch attempt to do something. Whereas this game, it's turn one. Yeah, go and hit that other guy. Don't worry, they'll do it to you in a minute. And it's that constant kind of squabbling that I think it really, yeah, it frames it in the right way. This is a game where you are going to do that, and it's going to happen to you right back, and that's fine.
Yeah. And that because the event cards are so swingy as well, that you're able to suddenly have a massive upset. But it does also reward you being in a strong position a lot of the time. But also, I mean, I had games where you'd have factions that were wiped out turn one, and that might sound really off-putting to you guys listening, because I would hear that and think that's terrible. But being wiped out of your troops doesn't mean you're out of the game, especially for some of the factions. Having troops is essentially a means to an end and not anything to do with their win condition. And if you're getting wiped out turn one, that means your ally is getting ignored. And usually your win condition will have something dependent on them being in a good position as well. So you know that you'll be able to then be ignored later because they'll need to be the focus. And you know that even if you still just focused all game, you might still be able to get away with it and get what you need to achieve your goal. I think with one exception, I think all of them, except the Romans, have two things that contribute to their win condition. It's like you need X plus Y to be whatever number. So even if you're struggling to achieve one side of your objective because you've lost all your troops, you can look at a different one. The Romans are the only exception there, but the Romans are very powerful, so you can't worry if you're the Romans.
Well, in version 2, yeah, and I think I did say earlier in the show, I'll talk about why version 2 is bad. I think I should actually do it instead of saying I'm going to do it. I'm going to boil it down to 3 reasons. So I don't think a lot needs to be said because version 2 is just a lot better. One is the factions are just a little bit better balanced, and I say a little bit. They're fixed because some of them are glaringly flawed in version 1. The Romans in version 1 they have a really lofty score that they have to get, and it involves the cities not being destroyed. And like Scruffy said, one city can get destroyed in turn 1, which means they can't win. That's not great, to say the least. The Trinovantes in version 1, as another example, they need the amount of forts they own and the amount of regions they control to add up to 5. Now, they made a very subtle change for version 2. It's the amount of forts you own above the second most tribe with the most forts. So it's the difference. And that makes such a big difference because, as I said, the last 2 times I played as all 4 factions, the Trinovantes won because they start in control of 1 region and they start in 1 fort. So they already have 2. They just need 3 more points. Another reason is the turn order is slightly less fair in version 1. Now, the reason for this is slightly a little bit too nuanced for me to go into too much depth on the show, but trust me, it just feels a bit more like a hard edge that isn't great. Yeah, version 2 is just more interesting. There are individual forts on version 2 and version 1. Multiple factions can occupy the same fort, so it's not as interesting, it's not as much of a point of attention. And finally, the third main thing, so you got the turn order, the factions being more balanced, and the third most important thing is the events are way more interesting in version 2. In version 2, you really get through the event deck, and they are much less situational. I know, Scruffy, you said they're quite situational, and they are, but in version 1, I felt like it reminded me of War of the Ring, where you really have to plan to use a card. You have to have certain things in order to use a card. Whereas in version 2, they're just kind of tempting little offers, like you could do 2 actions, or hey, check me out. I can I can score 2 automatic hits in 2 different regions. Come use me. And you're like, yeah, I will. That sounds great.
Yeah, the event cards, I think there's one, that one you just mentioned, the chariots and caravans. It's a little bit too swingy. There's another one as well that I think is really powerful for the Catavolani, which is that they get to immediately just put 4 units on the board. And if you compare that to the fact that you normally get to put 2 units when you rally, that's double. That's if you do it in 2 your action in 2 regions. That's a pretty big jump, isn't it? Like in terms of value.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that is only a 4 swing really for the Catavolani, because you choose a region in which the Romans have presence. So if you were the Romans, you'd never get, and then set your unit value to 4 in that region. So if the Romans took it, they'd have to have at least 1. So it's going to be an increase of 3 at most, and it also increases the sympathy in that region, which is very discouraging for especially the Iceni.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I kind of like, I mean, I know they're not all perfectly balanced, as you said, some of them are swingy, but the fact that they're so tempting means that the game state in version 2 gets altered in more interesting ways more often. And that's just, yeah, it's just more of a fun game, I feel, more of a well thought out, and just, it's essentially just a patched version of version 1. But yeah, so version 2 for sure.
And having those overpowered cards in the deck, because you can always see the upcoming event, it kind of is quite fun, because you get to plan around it to some extent. You can do a big pass upset just to make sure you don't let the faction that you don't want to pick that card up, you know. And they are all very, very powerful in certain situations. So
yeah, and there's 2 ways you can prevent them from doing it. You can do the event yourself, but if you don't want to, you don't have to do that event. You can just pick the first box on the turn slot, and you can just do 1 action, 2 regions, and then they don't have a choice. They can't pick the event then. There's nothing they can do to pick the event, even though you haven't picked it either. And it's another way, like I keep saying, that's just a lovely forcing line in the game, where going first means not only do I choose my action, but I limit your choices. And that it's just such a nice level of planning, and I think I'm just super excited to explore this genre more.
Yeah, me too. And I think that goes to the heart of what the episode it was about for us. Was we were trying to see if this was a good entry to the coin games, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm really excited to try a coin game out now. You know, being someone who's never played one before, I cannot wait to take that next step. Maybe go into Cuba Libre, who knows, and then see where this journey takes me, because it's introduced me to a whole bunch of mechanics that I can see from watching that little playthrough from One Stop Cop Shop, that I can see that they're all there and they're all fun, and they're all in the other titles probably, and you know, different ones will do them slightly differently. In the same way that Railway Station captures the essence of an 18xx game, I feel like this has captured the essence of a coin game. And if nothing else, even if I don't like those games, I'll always have Coin Tribes Revolts to enjoy and play with, and I will be playing with it a lot outside of this thing. I'm going to keep it set up and be playing it all week, because it's a great game. And it's so low intensity. It's really fun.
Yeah, and from another person who's never played a coin game, when I watched the playthrough of Cuba Libre, I was shocked at how many mechanics I instantly recognized.
Yeah.
I was shocked. I was like, wow, they've knocked out of the park on Coin Tribes Revolt, because this feels so familiar to me. I automatically recognize the propaganda phase as the reckoning phase.
Hmm.
Automatically recognize the events. I automatically recognize the turn structure.
Hmm.
I understood ideas of control. I was familiar with the bots, the asymmetric winning conditions, the asymmetric actions. All of it felt, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. It's like Coin Tribes, but this instead.
Yeah.
And it feels, it's funny you mentioned Railway Station 18XX, because it felt like once you play one 18XX and people will go, oh, have you played 1830? Oh, it's like that, but the companies float at 50% rather than 60. Oh, and the market works this way. It feels like I didn't have to listen to the full explanation. I recognize those things pretty instantly. I just needed to know what the changes were. That's pretty exciting. And I was amazed at how well it captured the essence. I went on to Board Game Geek and I found the original entry to the 9 card tournament that Laurie Phillips, the designer, wrote. And he said that, in his opinion, coin games need to do these 6 following things. And I'm gonna read these to you now, Scruffy. But as I go through these point by point, you're gonna be like, "Yep, tick, tick." So the first thing he says is, generally there are 4-player factions with pairs of factions loosely semi-cooperative, but ultimately out for themselves.
Tick.
Tick. Yep. Second is asymmetrical faction abilities and win conditions.
Tick.
Area control and support or opposition.
Tick.
Right. The action plus bonus, and limited action system using first and second eligible and inactive.
Tick.
Okay. Initiative determined randomly with the next turn's order open information.
Tick.
And finally, the 6th thing, gameplay separated into periods of random length. Winning can only be triggered at certain points.
Tick.
If those are the 6 genre-defining mechanics, well, then this has it all, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we didn't mention in detail, but you can see when the next turn who's going to be acting first, because they're in the inactive dice. You roll them at the cleanup phase for the people that acted last turn, and so you know what the order is going to be next turn, and that's something it does. It does all of that in a nutshell, but also. I don't feel. I mean, obviously, it sacrifices a lot of the complexity in terms of the scale and the varied choices you get, the varied events you get. It's distilled down into a much smaller package, but the core mechanics are just exactly the same. And I would say, I was watching the YouTube video and thinking that of Cuba Libre, and thinking that in some ways, like I've already said, with the cards being shuffled in rather than the reckoning phase happening on the tracker, I think the elegance is really exciting in Coin Tribes Revolt. And I think the mainstay big box coin games are going to have some big shoes to fill from this little package. Like, they really are going to have to do something to justify their expansive nature and slightly more unwieldy design structure and maybe choices, because this has really sold me on the elegance of it all.
See, I love the elegance, but at times I felt like trying to cram it into a small design meant that some bits weren't great.
Well, would you like to unpack that for us now? Let's get some. We've had nothing but positive vibes right towards the end of the episode. Let's get some negative energy from you now. The dark side.
I don't mean to be negative. I really like the game, but I can imagine some people would find small elements a bit like it needs room to breathe. The design needs a little bit more room to breathe. And
do you think because we're not coin gamers, do you think anyone who's like somebody who's played loads of the big titles would come into this and be disappointed?
I don't know about disappointed. I think they'll be amazed at the elegance. Taken something the size of an elephant and they put it into those little things you carry cats in, So But in doing so, you're gonna break the box, right? In some areas, and I feel like this does it. I'll give you one example: a tiebreaker. Now, the tiebreaker in this game sucks.
Yeah.
The tiebreaker is, I think, in version 1, it's just play a rematch. In version 2, they tried to fix that. I can't remember the what they put
So
in.
I got to this on one of my first plays, and it was the closest to achieving their victory conditions. So you just look at how many away they were from winning. And then I think it was the one with the least troops on the board as a
Yeah,
kind of, I thought that was quite neat because it's kind of like a consolation prize. Like, well, if we get to a tiebreaker, you're looking bloated and useless with your massive armies, and I've had a hard game and I still got as close to you. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then the one that made it fall down is the third one, play a rematch, which is what I came to.
which sucks, and the reason it sucks is because it's very likely to happen. I mean, it happened to you where you couldn't resolve the tiebreaker. It happened to me in one of my games where I couldn't resolve and couldn't find a winner. And I tried to fix it, and I wrote down some stuff I thought would fix it. But I don't think it will. And the reason I don't think it will is because the game's so small, there isn't enough granularity. It is very likely, with just having 3 dice, it's very likely that there will be multiple factions with the same amount of units. It's very likely that you have multiple factions controlling the same amount of regions. There's only 4 regions. It's very likely that you're going to have ties all the way down because there isn't enough granularity. The design doesn't have enough room to breathe. And it made me think, if you said last episode that Clans of Caledonia is like eating an eclair all to yourself.
Stand by it. Stand by that.
And I think that was lovely. But if Clans is an eclair, then Coin Tribes Revolt is an espresso. It's got all the core elements of a much larger cup of coffee. But in distilling it to just that, it's going to have areas like the tiebreaker, like the turnover in version 1, where it's just a little bit too bitter. It's just a little bit less palatable. And it needs that larger cup to just kind of, I don't know, allow itself to I don't know, just be a bit better, I felt.
I don't think that's necessarily a criticism. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It is an espresso to perhaps the Coin Games coffee. And I love espresso sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you're in the mood for an espresso. I don't think it
Great.
needs to change. And I think you would agree with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that isn't a criticism of the game. It's just, I can imagine some people would feel that way. I certainly felt that way, but that didn't put me off. It made me think, okay, so I got Coin Tribes Revolt, and it's kind of a little bit wonky in some places. That's fine, because it only takes 10 to 30 minutes.
Doesn't take long to drink an espresso.
But it makes me excited to try a larger game. It makes me really excited to try a larger game.
Yeah, we've had our first taste of coffee, and now we want to dive headlong in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But if you're first, I don't. So is it a good entry point? I don't know. Is espresso a good place to start drinking coffee?
That's where I started.
I mean, this is the thing. If you like it, then you'll like all coffee. You'll go. Everything else from here is less intense. So yeah, I think, yeah, why not? It is a very good place to start because it's the place that we've started, and a lot of what I saw in Cuba Libre seemed really familiar. And this game is 3 pages. It's a free game. It's 3 pages, and it's made me feel like I can tackle coin games. Coin games have such a reputation of being unwieldy and difficult to learn. I've grokked the turn order. I've grokked the events. I get it now. I'm ready to grab a proper game.
100% agree.
Excellent.
So, shall we wrap that up and move on to the listener questions for this episode, Norm?
Yes, absolutely. Before we do, one last question, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could talk about. I have to say, I could talk about this for another 2 hours. I really enjoyed Coin Tribes Revolt, and I wish we had more time to go over it some more. But hey, we'll bring it up when we inevitably pick up a big box coin game in the future. Go ahead.
If someone printed this off tonight or tomorrow, whenever they print it off, and they said, I've only got time to play this once. How should they play it? How should they solo it? All four factions, as one faction,
Oh,
as two? How should they solo it?
oh, that's a hard one. I would say probably the way I started it was pick one faction that you like the look of and just play with free bots, because I think that's good. I think that allows you to sort of see what they're doing. And even on the turns where you're not acting, you're kind of watching the game unfold and learning the mechanics. I think it's a really good way to tutorialize the game. I was a bit worried when I first played like that, because I didn't think I'd enjoy it. Like, I'd be sat waiting for my turn while the bots were playing. But because I was learning as I was going, and I was learning the bots as I was going, I found that to be a really good way of doing it.
I would agree. I would also say playing as all four. That's how I learned.
Mm-hmm.
Playing as all four was surprisingly fun. And what it showed me is where the decision space is. Why would you pick this space over this space? This space is better. Why would I pick this one? Oh, I see it limits my opponent. With the bots, you lose a little bit of that because they cheat a bit. So playing as all four is also a very good way of playing.
I feel like you make a lot more mistakes when you play with four. I don't know if you found that, and you make a turn, and the next turn you go, what was I thinking last turn? I can now just destroy myself. Whereas when you play with the bots, they're acting pretty sensibly, and especially if you're just playing with one faction, you make your turns count, and you give it a little bit more thought than you do when you're playing all four factions. But again, I don't think that's a criticism. I never felt like I wasn't invested in each of the factions. I kind of maybe had one that I was like, oh, the poor Iceni, I hope they bring this back, or wow, aren't the Catavilani doing really well? And a bit of me was like, rooting for the Catavilani because I'm doing really well with them. But I played the best game I could for all of them, and I didn't feel like I was playing favorites.
Absolutely, except for I always want the blue to win.
Yeah, I always want the rebels to win. Ever since my first few games, it took me a long time to start playing the non-rebels, because I was playing the rebels and getting beaten by the non-rebels because I was new to the game. But now every time I'm rooting for the rebels a little bit.
Also, fun fact, I'm not sure if you're aware, but Coin Tribes Revolt is a very cool pun because the Iceni tribes are well documented for their use of coinage. Archaeologists have found a lot of coins from the Iceni. It's one of the things they're pretty famous for, actually. So it's also quite a nice little pun and a cool little historical fact that I learned when I was learning the game.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah. Okay, I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to move on now.
No, yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. That was really fun, and yeah, it was really cool. Let's do the question for this episode then, shall we?
Yeah.
The question for this episode is, what game could use a nice compacted down entry style game? Maybe a print and play, maybe something else. Maybe it's a genre of games like coin games or 18xx games. Is there one specific title or a group of titles that you think desperately needs that condensed version, the espresso version, that either because it would help new players get into the genre and it's a very daunting genre, or because you just want to play a quick version and you don't have time to pick the big box up every time and play a 2 or 3 hour or day long session?
I purchased Fields of Fire at the start of lockdown, and I still haven't played it because I'm just so intimidated by the rulebook. And I wish there was a 3-page game of that, where I go, oh, okay, these are already familiar concepts now. I get it, like I did with Coin Tribes Revolt. And we want to know what games you think could do with a Coin Tribes Revolt version, a micro version that teaches you all the core elements.
Yes.
Cool.
Let's have a listen to the feedback from the questions we got from last episode. And just a quick note, last episode, Kendall and I read the questions instead of Norm taking the full burden on his shoulders. And Norm really enjoyed listening to it. So from now on, I'm going to keep an eye on the listener questions and read them as well with Norm during the episode. We'll take it in turns, mix things up a bit.
Yeah, it just seemed really natural. I was like, Scruffy, that sounds way better than what we do.
Yeah, well, the reason we used to do it the way we did is because we used to get emails and I hadn't seen the emails. But now it being on the Discord server, it's weird me avoiding a channel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have actually kind of avoided it this week because I didn't want to confuse anyone who who likes the structure. But from now on, I'm going to be keeping an eye on the listener questions as well. But I'll help you read some of these out this episode.
All right, when you kick off with the first response.
Okay. So the listener question from this feels somehow more exciting because you're here. The listener question from last episode was, what is your favorite win condition in a solo game? So our first response from Peter Lovelace, and I'll just paraphrase what they say here. They said that their favorite win condition is when they're done with a game and literally want to show people their board state and say, look at what I've done, as a proud mama dog with her new puppies. Games in which you build something really work well for this, Feast for Odin, for example, or games with a great finale, like Mage Knight.
Yeah. I think those games are my sort of favorite winning condition, where there's an X where you build towards a finale. Mage Knight does that well. Even much smaller games like Friday, I think, does that very well with the pirates. You build through the hazard decks, and then you end in a huge flurry of violence towards the pirates.
Yeah.
I like that quite a lot.
You just have a sprawl of cards on the table.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, I know you like Mage Knight as well, Scruffy, but yeah, I love those games with the big finale.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's interesting because that can be tied to multiple different mechanics, can't it? It's more just about the appearance, the aesthetics there, isn't it? Of what you've created after the game. And that's really interesting. Like I was thinking of Founders of Gloomhaven, which has a win condition I'm not very fond of, but I love seeing the board state at the end of it and seeing this infrastructure I've built and all these tiles I've placed on the board.
Nice, excellent.
Even games like the silly little roll and write ones, like that's pretty clever and things. It's nice to see this sort of crossed off and ticked out thing. It's lovely, isn't it?
I think roll and writes are a big one where the final board state is very important. That's why I don't use, with the exception of a few roll and writes that I printed off myself. If I get a roll and write with multiple pads, I will use those pads and I won't laminate them. I will fill them in because I like looking back at them as well. I don't do it often, but when I open up the box and I see, oh, look at all these games I've played, that feels really good to me. I know some people are cringing at that thought, but yeah, I really like that. And I also like, if I do rubbish, just screw it up and throw it in the bin.
Yeah.
Why not?
You know, it reminds me of playing Atmosphere when I was a kid. And the way Atmosphere ends is you each write your nightmare on a little card and then put that in the kind of middle of the board and you draw them out at the end. And if you draw your nightmare, you lose or something. But just when you pick the game back up and you look at it and you've got this kind of pencil scrawl of people writing nonsense on the thing, it's kind of it's a nice nostalgia trip, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly.
Sorry, a bit of a divergence there.
No, but it's nice. I think it goes into what Peter's saying, where you finish the game state and you're left with something really cool. Even games that I don't enjoy this one solo, but definitely multiplayer, like Castles of Mad King Ludwig, where you finish your castle and you're like, look at this, the stairs go down here and it goes into this room, and then you come out here and there's the butter room. What goes on in the butter room? Ooh.
Not enough games think about their finale, I think, especially in the Euro game genre. It's always just collect points, then you do a bit of maths at the end and somebody wins. You know, I think the finale is important. It should be dramatic and it should be fun and you should be left with something to tell a story about.
Yeah, no, 100%. 100%. And Mage Knight does that really well because, as you said in our Mage Knight episode, you have the kind of meta puzzle of building your deck and your tableau towards the cities. And it's only when you really go against cities where you get to see if what you built is good enough. It's like the final test, you know? Coffee Roaster does this really well as well. When you choose when to do something called a cup test, which is when, if you think your bag is good enough, you draw a certain amount of tokens and you make one cup of coffee. And that one cup of coffee you make at the end of the last round, that's your score.
That's so good.
Yeah, it's really neat. We should maybe consider that for the show because it's a neat game.
I do want to play that. I do.
Excellent. Well, we had another response from Cooper, who, just like Peter from the last response, are the co-hosts of Einzelspiel. Another shout out. I felt bad not being on the episode where we gave them the shout out. So there it is, guys. Cooper says, I don't mind beat your own score game. A Feast for Odin is my favorite solo game of all time. I enjoy trying out different strategies and comparing the score afterwards. And while I also like win conditions, I like to be able to measure my progress in playing the game somehow, either through points or raising the difficulty setting, like the Nemesis in Aeon's End. But I think the most important part for me is the feeling that I have when the end of the game comes around. My favourite games are those where the last round or action still has meaning. Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, for instance, manage that quite often, where the last card played can decide whether you win or lose. I also really like the end conditions in Nemo's War. You basically collect points, but your success depends on how many points you've managed to get. You can lose, barely win, or even manage a triumphant victory. If you make it to the end, that is, because you can always instantly lose if you're not careful. Really enjoy all the fluff text for the different kinds of endings as well. I think that's really interesting. I think these guys should have their own podcast because
Yeah, wow, yeah. There's a lot to unpack there, isn't there? Yeah, I mean, I've been wanting to play Nemo as well for a long time now, and that thing of the amount of points being about your variable success. It's the thing that I was struggling with last time with because it's something that happens quite a lot in solo games. But I think if it's handled right, then it can be really good. I think it's just when you have these kind of arbitrary brackets. I don't know whether I like it. But yeah, maybe Nemo's War does it slightly differently. I don't know. I'd have to give the game a go, which I do intend to do at some point. There's so many games to play.
There's one or two.
But that thing there about the last action or last round or even the last action still having meaning, I think it's really important. I think that ties in to what we were just saying about something feeling like a finale. And it would be nice if the eventual sort of score or win condition ties to that finale. Like you were saying in the coffee roaster, where you just have that last turn, you make the perfect cup of coffee, that's your score. Ooh, that's magic.
Yeah, I think Coin Tribes and maybe perhaps other coin games in general manage that really well with the scoring happening semi-randomly. Pax Premier does that with a dominance check as well. That's quite a unique thing where there are winning conditions, but the winning conditions, you're not in charge of when that happens. There's no set end. It's going to happen at either a random interval or at a player-driven interval. That's a really nice tension. And I think if I had to answer that question, I would say games with a great finale like Mage Night or Friday or Coffee Roaster, or even games like Pax Premier or Coin Tribes where you have this interval of scoring that changes the game and your focus entirely.
Yeah, I mean the race games have it to a T, don't they? With the drama, which is essentially what Coin Tribes is. It's a race game that you're trying to race to your victory conditions and then hold on to them. Having that variable end time is, I think, really important for that because otherwise it becomes very tedious to know when that somebody is going to win. There's no way to catch them. They're going to win. Having it kind of suddenly happen feels more dramatic and exciting. And especially, I think this is something we didn't mention in the episode, that the win conditions for when I was playing at least felt fairly abstracted. I didn't quite know who was winning or when. So when a reckoning happened, it was like, ooh, time to see who won. Time to see if somebody won. Oh, that's exciting. And looking through the cards, like, did these guys win? Since I'm pretty new to the game, I don't remember what some of them are. And okay, maybe they did.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Or more specifically, or the reckoning's going to happen at the end of the round. Who's about to win? That does lead to one criticism I almost forgot about with the bots, is that when a reckoning's about to happen, they don't change focus.
Yeah.
So the last time I won, I got into a winning position, and then I was inactive. I rolled for the reckoning. The reckoning's going to happen at the end of the round. Okay. That means there are two bots going, uninterrupted, and I have no say in what they do whatsoever. There's no way I'm going to win, right? Well, yes, I am, because they don't check for winning conditions. They don't have the thing that the Wakan has in Pax Premier where they go, oh, is there a dominance check nearby? Well, then in that case, I'll change what I do, which I don't know how you could combat that. Maybe if they were double-sided, you like flip them over when a reckoning's announced. But I don't know.
I think if you did that, you'd have to take away their cheaty powers. Yeah. I think they make up for that by being little cheats throughout the whole game.
You also lose some of the elegance as well, and I think that's another area where I was saying that the espresso might be a little bit too bitter. It's another area where, because this game has to be small, they can't do stuff like that. They can't be too complicated, which does mean that they won't be as good.
Yes.
Cool.
But I did like not having to pay attention to the win conditions and be like, oh, I better check. Like in the with the Wakan, it was a lot of upkeep having to check. Okay, can somebody win? And I personally sometimes like to just let it flow, let's see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly valid as well.
Cool. So we also had a message from Rumpel Frumpkins, who says, it's not exactly a win condition, but I really enjoy the way the game state changes future games in Your Name Here and Argonauts. At the end of each game you survive, you tick a box on each card you defeated. As the boxes fill up, the cards become more difficult to defeat, more damaging, or even add new cards to the game. Some of the new cards are helpful and some are harmful. It's very straightforward and simple campaign mode that makes you think carefully about what cards you defeat in each game session. Sometimes it's better to just take the damage or leave helpful items unclaimed so you can get them more easily in a future game. So there we have a win condition based in something like a campaign thing where you are setting yourself up for future games. How do you feel about those, Norm?
Yeah, I mean, campaign games are super popular, and I like them. I like them. I feel like sometimes I like the promise of a campaign game more than the actual execution.
Yeah, 100% agree.
But most of my favorite games are complete packages in one sitting, not a campaign. But that being said, I love Aeon's End Legacy. We love the evolution mechanic there. That kind of reminds me of that sort of evolution mechanic in Aeon's End Legacy.
Yeah, that's true. And see, I think personally, I prefer when those things emerge during the game rather than as a result of the end condition. I understand that the game needs to be working towards some end condition and that needs to have ramifications further down the line, but often they can be mishandled such that failing once snowballs into more failures in the future. And I think a lot of campaigns really struggle to get that right. And sometimes they completely drop the ball and failing is just, you just got to try again. Ugh, that's no fun. So yeah, I think that's an interesting sort of thing. I don't have an answer for that on campaign games, and I don't know if that's just something inherent in the way they work, that you have to be striving for something and you have to be rewarded for that. You need to get that extrinsic feedback from there, but I don't know how. Yeah, I don't know how to handle that in a campaign game, and maybe that's why I have such a problem with them sometimes. But Aeon's End was great, so I guess it can work.
Okay, and the final response was from Rob, the game guy. Rob said, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think I've landed on what is most satisfying to me. Firstly, I do not have any problem with points as a win condition. That being said, I challenge myself to think what makes me feel most satisfied. And I think it's this, unlocking something new, meaning games that in having success, they allow you to unlock something new. Gloomhaven does this with new scenarios, new items in the shop. Legacy games doing this by allowing you to progress and interact with new components. It feels like a tangible reward. That actually reminded me of something that you said, Scruffy, during the Clans episode, which is, with solo games, sometimes you struggle with that extrinsic reward. What is the extrinsic reward? What is the outside of the game? What is the meta reward? That seems like a really good answer to that question.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think just taking that a step further, that sometimes that doesn't have to literally be an unlock, like in a campaign game, but it can just be in the excitement to play the game again in a different way, like in Coin, or in I've had games of Mage Knight, for example, where you get to the end of the game, and whether you win or lose, your experience has taught you something and enriched you in such a way as to make you compelled to do it again differently with a different character. I'll try it differently with Coin Tribes. I'll try playing with 2 bots instead of 3, or maybe try playing with no bots this time. It's something that is unlocked by that playthrough and by that experience. There's, I think, a real thing there.
Yeah, it reminds me of I saw when I purchased Mage Knight, I purchased the Ultimate Edition, and I had played it before then, but just sort of the base game.
Mm-hmm.
And playing with the Ultimate Edition, I sort of treated it like a legacy game. I went, well, I'm just going to play the base game. I'm going to play the intro scenario. Okay, then I'm going to play Full Conquest. Okay, well, now I'm going to keep doing that until I win consistently.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, now I'm going to introduce the Lost Legion. Okay, well, now I'm going to play against Voltaire. Now I'm going to try Shades of Tesla. And it took me like a full 12 months, and maybe a bit more, to finally put in the Shades of Tesla stuff as well. But that was a really nice experience. And yeah, that tangible thing of playing the game in a different way or trying out a new element in the game that you haven't before. You're right. It is a reward, and it's a real extrinsic reward that exists almost outside of the game itself. It's the excitement to come back.
Yes. Wow, that was all really, really amazing feedback, guys. Thank you so much for your messages and for listening. That was really, really a lot of fun.
Excellent. What's the question? Remind everyone.
Yes. So the question this episode is, what is a game or game series that you think could do with a condensed down, simplified mode?
Perfect. And if you want to write in, then you can do so. Join our Discord. It is free. You're missing out if you're not on there. I'm not lying. Just click the link in the description. We have a tab called Listener Questions. Drop your response there. Alternatively, email us. It's alwaysplayer1podcast@gmail.com. You can also message us on Facebook. We have links to Facebook in the description. Or you can drop us a line on Instagram. We're at alwaysplayer1podcast. We're also on Reddit, always_player_1. And finally, you can support the show if you wish to do so. Obviously, many ways. First of all, by listening. Thank you. But second of all, you can support us financially if you're able on Patreon. It's patreon.com/alwaysplayer1podcast. And for doing so, you'll literally double the amount of content because we release the planning phase every week. We don't release a podcast. So you'll get weekly rather than 2 weekly episodes. That's pretty much everything for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. It's great to be back. Thank you, Scruffy, for holding down the fort whilst I was gone. And we'll catch you guys in 2 weeks.
Yep, thank you again. Have a nice rest of your day.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the show, don't forget to check out our Patreon page. The links to that are in the description. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Always Player One. Until then, reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or by email to keep the conversation going.